Robert Plant was born on August 20, 1948, in West Bromwich, England. Decades later, millions of rock fans would know him as the unforgettable voice of Led Zeppelin, one of the most powerful and influential bands in music history. With his golden hair, electrifying stage presence, and haunting vocals, Robert Plant became a symbol of the wild freedom that defined 70s rock music. To the world, he looked unstoppable. Night after night, stadium crowds screamed his name as Led Zeppelin conquered America and transformed rock concerts into something almost mythical. Fans saw a man living the ultimate dream: fame, fortune, endless applause. During the height of Led Zeppelin's success, Robert Plant appeared larger than life itself. But old rock fans know the truth is often far more painful behind the spotlight. Because beneath the legendary image was a man carrying heartbreak that never truly disappeared. There was one tragedy that quietly changed Robert Plant forever, and many longtime fans believe he spent the rest of his life emotionally trying to recover from it. Friends noticed the difference. Audiences slowly heard it in his voice. Even his relationship with fame itself seemed to change after the devastating loss that shattered his world. This was not simply another rock and roll story about excess or celebrity scandals. This was the story of a father whose life changed forever during the very years the world believed he had everything. And for many fans who grew up listening to Led Zeppelin, the pain Robert Plant carried after that moment became impossible to ignore. Long before Robert Plant became one of the defining voices of classic rock, he was a restless young man growing up in post-war England, dreaming about American blues music and a life far beyond the factories surrounding his hometown. Born on August 20, 1948 in West Bromwich, England, Plant became obsessed with music at an early age. He admired powerful singers who sounded emotional, unpredictable, and completely alive. Even as a teenager, he believed ordinary life was never going to satisfy him. During the 1960s, Robert Plant performed with small local bands across England while struggling financially and searching for his identity as a musician. He worked difficult jobs, traveled constantly, and chased opportunities that often led nowhere. But people who heard him sing remembered him immediately. His voice sounded wild yet emotional at the same time, capable of both explosive power and deep sadness. Everything changed when guitarist Jimmy Page invited Plant to join a new project that would soon become Led Zeppelin. What followed was one of the most extraordinary rises in music history. By the early 1970s, Led Zeppelin had become the biggest rock band in the world. Their concerts were louder, darker, and more intense than almost anything audiences had ever experienced. Fans worshipped the group. Critics feared them. Younger musicians desperately tried to imitate them. And standing at the center of the storm was Robert Plant, the golden-haired frontman whose voice became the soundtrack of an entire generation. But behind the fame, Plant often appeared far more fragile than fans realized. Unlike many celebrities who enjoyed constant attention, Robert Plant sometimes seemed uncomfortable with the role of being treated like a rock god. Friends described him as emotional, thoughtful, and deeply attached to his family life away from the stage. While the world celebrated Led Zeppelin's dangerous image, Plant privately cared about very different things. Then tragedy struck during the height of the band's success. In 1977, Robert Plant's 5-year-old son Karak died suddenly after a severe illness, while Led Zeppelin remained at the peak of global fame. The loss devastated him beyond words. Tours stopped. Music suddenly felt different. And many longtime fans believe the man who returned afterward was emotionally changed forever. In the summer of 1977, Led Zeppelin looked untouchable. Robert Plant and the band were filling enormous stadiums across America, while fans treated them like living legends. Every concert felt bigger than the last. Newspapers described the group as the kings of rock and roll. To the outside world, Robert Plant seemed to have everything a musician could ever dream about. But behind the scenes, his real life was beginning to collapse. While touring in the United States, Plant received terrifying news from home. His young son Karak had suddenly become seriously ill. The situation quickly turned tragic. Karak died from a severe infection before reaching his 6th birthday. Robert Plant was devastated beyond words. Friends later described him as emotionally shattered, unable to fully process what had happened. For many older fans, this became the defining turning point of Robert Plant's entire life. Because after losing his son, the image of the fearless rock god suddenly disappeared. In its place was a grieving father struggling to understand how life could continue normally after such unbearable pain. Plant later admitted there were moments when he questioned whether music even mattered anymore. Fame suddenly felt meaningless compared to what he had lost. Led Zeppelin immediately canceled their remaining tour dates. The massive machine surrounding the band simply stopped. For one of the biggest groups in the world, it was shocking. But people close to Plant understood he was dealing with something far deeper than exhaustion or celebrity pressure. He was grieving in front of the entire world. Fans also began noticing changes in him after this period. Robert Plant still performed. He still recorded music. But something about him felt different. Older, more distant, more reflective. The wild confidence that once defined Led Zeppelin slowly gave way to a quieter sadness many longtime listeners could hear in interviews and later performances. Some fans even believe the tragedy permanently changed his relationship with Led Zeppelin itself. Because after experiencing such a personal loss, the endless chaos of superstardom no longer seemed as important to him as it once had. The screaming crowds, the luxury hotels, the larger-than-life image of rock stardom suddenly looked empty beside the reality of losing a child. And, for Robert Plant, that emotional wound never fully disappeared. After the death of his son, many people expected Robert Plant to walk away from music completely. Friends close to him later admitted, there were moments when he seemed emotionally lost, unsure whether returning to the stage even made sense anymore. The glamorous image of 70s rock suddenly felt painfully disconnected from real life. But eventually, Robert Plant returned to Led Zeppelin. The problem was that nothing truly felt the same again. Fans still filled arenas, the band still sounded massive, yet people around Plant quietly noticed a change in his personality after 1977. He appeared more reflective and far less interested in the reckless rock star lifestyle that had once surrounded Led Zeppelin. The fame that used to feel exciting now seemed exhausting. Some interviews from that era reveal a man already questioning whether the endless machine of celebrity life was slowly draining him emotionally. Then another tragedy struck. In 1980, Led Zeppelin drummer John Bonham died suddenly, after years of heavy alcohol abuse. Bonham was not just Plant's bandmate, he was one of his closest lifelong friends. The two men came from the same region of England, and shared a deep personal bond long before global fame arrived. His death devastated Plant once again. And this time, Led Zeppelin came to an end. The surviving members made the decision not to continue, without Bonham believing the band could never truly exist without him. For many artists, losing the biggest band in the world would have been emotionally crushing on its own. But for Robert Plant, it happened while he was already carrying years of unresolved grief from losing his son. Suddenly, the entire world he once knew had disappeared. The legendary band was gone. One of his closest friends was gone. The carefree energy that once defined the 1970s was gone. And many longtime fans believe this was the period when Robert Plant fully began distancing himself from the larger-than-life image people still expected from him. Instead of desperately chasing nostalgia, Plant moved in the opposite direction. He explored different styles of music, smaller performances, more personal songwriting. He rarely seemed interested in simply recreating the past for money or applause. While fans constantly begged for Led Zeppelin reunions, Plant often appeared hesitant, almost as if revisiting that era also meant reopening emotional wounds connected to loss, grief, and memories he could never fully escape. For older rock fans watching through the years, it became clear that Robert Plant was no longer trying to be immortal. He was simply trying to survive the weight of everything he had lived through. As the decades passed, Robert Plant slowly became something very different from the reckless young frontman fans remembered from the 70s. While many classic rock stars spent later years desperately trying to relive their glory days, Plant often seemed uncomfortable, living entirely in the past, and longtime fans began understanding why. Too much pain lived there. Everywhere he went, audiences still wanted Led Zeppelin stories. They wanted the screaming concerts, the wild nights, the impossible vocals, and the myth of the untouchable rock god. But behind the nostalgia was a man who had buried a child, lost close friends, survived decades of emotional pressure, and watched parts of his old world disappear forever. Many fans noticed that Robert Plant rarely spoke about tragedy in dramatic ways. He did not constantly seek sympathy. In fact, he often appeared guarded when interviews moved too deeply into personal pain. But that silence itself told audiences something important. Some wounds never fully leave people no matter how much time passes. Even his music gradually changed with age. The older Plant became, the more emotional depth appeared in his performances. His voice no longer sounded like the reckless scream of a young rock star trying to conquer the world. Instead, it carried experience, sadness, wisdom, and reflection. Older listeners especially connected with this version of Robert Plant because they recognized something familiar inside him. Life had humbled him. And perhaps that is one reason so many longtime fans still respect him today. Not simply because he was once famous, not only because Led Zeppelin changed music history, but because Robert Plant survived the kind of emotional losses that quietly destroy many people. Yet somehow he continued moving forward without becoming bitter or trapped entirely inside nostalgia. There were opportunities over the years to make enormous money through full Led Zeppelin reunions. Fans begged for it constantly. The music industry wanted it desperately. But Plant repeatedly resisted turning the past into a permanent circus. Some people criticized him for that decision. Others believed he understood something deeper. Certain chapters of life are too emotional to endlessly recreate, especially when those memories are connected to people you loved and lost. For many older rock fans today, Robert Plant no longer represents just the glory of classic rock. He represents survival. The painful reality that even the biggest legends eventually face heartbreak, aging, grief, and the quiet loneliness that fame can never protect anyone from. And perhaps that is why his story still feels so personal after all these years. For older generations who lived through the golden age of rock music, Robert Plant will always represent more than just Led Zeppelin's legendary voice. He became a symbol of an era when music felt dangerous, emotional, and completely alive. But behind the unforgettable concerts and larger-than-life image was a man carrying grief that fame could never erase. The death of his son changed him forever. The loss of friends changed him again. And over time, many fans watched Robert Plant slowly transform from an untouchable rock god into something far more human. That may be the real reason audiences still connect with him today. Not because he stayed frozen in the 1970s. Not because he tried to endlessly relive the past, but because people saw a man survive heartbreak while continuing to move forward through music, memory, and time itself. And perhaps deep down, older fans recognize part of their own lives inside that journey. Because eventually everyone learns the same painful truth. Even legends cannot escape loss.